Hello, everyone, and welcome to this breakout session, Reverse Engineer Your Career, Map Where You Want to Go. I'm Candace Thorson, Managing Editor at GovLoop, and I want to thank you so much for joining us in this session today. When it comes to your career, it's really important to have a plan, because if you just wander sort of aimlessly from one job or responsibility to the next, that does have downsides. But you need to calculate your next steps in a more focused way, not just a general vague sort of approach. If you need to think, for instance, like where will I be 5 or 10 years from now, and then work backward. So we have an expert today who's going to share how to set long-term goals and then work backward from them, and in doing so, create an effective career plan. I have a few housekeeping items to go over first, though. If you're on Twitter, now known as X, we'd love to hear what you're learning. So please use the hashtag NextGenGov to share your takeaways. We have great resources available for you to download from the console, including the slide deck you're about to see, so be sure to check those out. If you run into technical problems, when they do happen, just put a message in the Q&A tab, and Julia, my colleague, will help you out. You can also use that Q&A portal to submit questions of our speaker, so please feel free to drop them in at any time during the session, because she's interested in answering them and hearing what you have to say. And we also have an open chat, so that's where you can interact with attendees. And again, feel free to put in your comments whenever you want. Don't be shy. If you get pulled away from the session and have to step away for a few minutes, that's totally okay, because tomorrow we're going to email you a link to the entire event on demand so you can catch up on anything you missed. And finally, we're giving 1 CPE credit for your participation in the session today. So there are 3 things you have to do to get the credit. You have to stay and participate for the whole session. You have to take all the polls, and then you have to fill out the post-event CPE evaluation form. And just as a reminder, the polls are going to appear on the slides window on the, I believe the left-hand side. So when a poll question comes up, select your response and then hit submit, and that's going to send us your answer. The CPE evaluation form is in the resource module on your console, or you can go back to the main environment in the Resource Center page. And we will send you directly your CPEs once we confirm that you met all the requirements. So now that I have all of that out of the way, I want to introduce our speaker. We have LeAnn Oliver. She is the Director of Corporate Business Systems in the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of the Financial Officer, and she has lots of really valuable insights. So I want to thank you for being here, LeAnn, and I will hand it over to you now.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we have, the next thing we have are some polls here so that I can figure out who I'm talking to here, since I can't see you.
So the first poll question, if everybody could just answer, how many years have you worked for government? So less than 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 11 to 20 years, or more than 20 years. So this is going to help give a sense of who the audience is, so that you can calibrate your remarks accordingly. It's interesting to see. We'll give everybody probably about 30 more seconds to answer. How long have you been in government, LeAnn? You only look like you're 25. So you can say.
Oh, well, thank you. I've been in government longer than that. I've actually been in government for 2024, for 44 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
It is.
Okay.
I've seen a lot of things.
I'm sure you have. Okay. So most people less than 5 years.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful.
So we will go to the next question then. Are you more interested in pursuing a career primarily as a subject matter expert, a general manager, or a member of the senior executive service? What kind of subject matter expert? I mean, about any kind of
subject matter. I mean, you may end up in an agency that, does something that you get very interested in, in the subject matter, and it may have been something you didn't know about before you started. So usually think of that as a topical subject, like, renewable energy or agriculture, agricultural production, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And these are not mutually exclusive, by the way, but depending on where you are in your career and what your interests are, you're probably going to fall into one of these categories, and you can certainly migrate from one to the next.
Yeah. And just because you want to be a subject matter expert doesn't mean that later in your career you don't want to be a member of the senior executive service, for instance.
Precisely.
It's like this is kind of maybe perhaps your next step is what you're.
Yes.
Perhaps.
Yes. I mean, it looks like we have a lot of people here who are fairly new in their career, and being a subject matter expert, particularly in a subject that is a new and emerging subject, can be a very good stepping stone to get to those other two levels.
Right. Right. Okay, I'll pull up the results in just a moment. Most want to be subject matter experts.
Well, it's about 50-50 if you merge the other two together, a little bit less than 50-50. Yeah. So that's good. And all right. Okay.
Next question, how long do you expect to work for the government? So a few years and then go into the private sector, the remainder of your full-time career, go back and forth between the private and public sectors, and or the fourth option is you don't know.
And don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer.
Yeah. These days with the market the way it is, it's hard to say,
Exactly. It's very hard to say.
Yeah. Do you know how many people like what the change has been? People used to plan to be in government for most of their full-time career, and now they plan to go in the private sector. Has that changed a lot?
I think it has changed, because when you joined the government a long time ago, you were in a retirement system that made it very difficult. Now they changed that, so the FERS retirement system does allow you to go back and forth much more easily. So I think when they made that change, it allowed, it made it easier for people to cycle in and out. But my sense is that now people are more likely to cycle in and out than they used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Okay, I'll give everybody just like a second or two more. The remainder of your full-time career. And don't know, but the remainder. That's great. That's really great. And then this is our last poll question. Are you interested in hearing more about nuts and bolts of a federal career, or career hacks and observations that were learned through doing? That's interesting. I'm curious to see what people think. When you started your career in government, what would you have been more interested in? Maybe that's not a fair question. I'm just putting you on the spot. Why
actually,
not, right?
When I started my career in government, I pretty much decided that I wanted to be in the senior executive service. So I started out thinking that I wanted to be in the senior executive service, which for those I'm sure most people on the call know that that's the highest level of career civil service that you can be in.
Okay, I'll give everybody just a couple of seconds more. Okay, I'll pull up the results now. Wow, career hacks and observations learned through doing. Interesting.
Okay, that's fine. I think we can get started now. So if we can go to the next slide.
Sure.
Thank you. First off, and this is something that I wish someone had told me when I was at the early stages of my career, that there is no way to predict exactly how your career in the federal government will progress. If you had asked me when I started if I could tell that I was going to have the job title that I have now, or if you had told me that I was going to have the job title that I have now, I would have no idea how I got here. And, I've had a bunch of job titles over the years, including one of the worst ones that I have ever heard in the federal government. I was at one point the acting associate deputy administrator for entrepreneurial development, which has an acronym of the DADA-ED, which is even worse than the title. I used to be embarrassed when I had to go give speeches and people introduced me. So you just really don't, know what's going to happen, but you have to pay attention, and you got to go with the flow. I mean, I sometimes tell my younger staff that working in the federal government is like surfing. You can't control the wave, but what your goal is to stay upright and get to the beach in one piece. Land on the beach in one piece. And that is a really good way of looking at it, because it takes into account that there's lots of flexibility, that you're not going to know. I mean, at a certain point when the wave becomes obvious what it is, how you react to it is really the most important thing in terms of what happens with your career. And sometimes you're going to get really bad waves. Sometimes you're going to get great waves. But in both cases, you couldn't really predict that wave was going to be like that. And so if you acknowledge that, and in fact, even embrace that fact, it makes it a whole lot less stressful, even though a specific situation could be really stressful. But in terms of if you think of your overall career that way, it's a calming effect, I think. You do need to go with the flow, unless you don't like where the flow is going. And that's where we get to the career management part of this. Let's go to the next slide. Oh. I think it's there we go. But yeah, you cannot be clueless about this, though. You have to be thoughtful. And you can identify a general direction that you want to go, and then think very strategically about what it takes to get there. And that question earlier about with the three choices of subject matter expert, GS system, or an SES, was aimed at getting to this point, which is if you identify the general direction that you want to go, and you may change, I was a career expert in finance for a long time in my career before I went into, even though I intended to get into senior management. But there are different things that you do at different phases of your career, so you have to keep that in mind. And basically, no matter how you consider any of this stuff, you have to be strategic about it. There's just no, you can, and there's several ways you can do this. You can talk to senior colleagues who are a little more senior than you are, that have been around, and most people will be happy to tell you how they got where they are, and what they did and what they regretted. Most people like to be asked for advice. I mean, you might occasionally find someone that doesn't want to share, but usually people, it's kind of a nice little ego stroke to be asked that. So, ask away. The questions that you have to ask yourself strategically, are you having the experiences that you need to get where you want to go? Are you interested and stimulated by what you're doing? Because if the answer to that is no, that's a huge red flag. And you then have to figure out, why is it a no? Is it because of of the people that you work with? Is it because of something organic in your environment? There's a whole bunch of factors that will affect how interested and stimulated you are. Another question to ask yourself is your supervisor supportive? Because if your supervisor is supportive, that's a huge benefit, because they will be probably likely to help you do some of the things that we're going to talk about in a minute here. If your supervisor is not supportive, you probably need to start looking for another job. I know that's not always fun and can be, just sort of not fun, but you probably need to get out of that situation. Strategically, you need to think about what the next moves are. And let's go to the next stage, next slide. My number one rule is you have to take advantage of opportunities presented to you. You can't control what they are, but when you get an opportunity to go to a good training class, or when you get an opportunity to go on a special assignment somewhere, or when you get an opportunity, to go back to grad school, if you happen to work someplace that is trying to acquire people who are educated in a certain area, take advantage of it. You may occasionally have to turn down an opportunity if you have a family commitment or something, but try not to do that, because in the long run, those opportunities are going to be the things that will broaden your experience and make you more well-rounded and better able to meet your goals. Ask for training. Depending on your agency's budget, that may be hard to get, but it is worth it to ask, because that sends the message that you are trying. And try to be creative about what kind of training might be useful. And then my second biggest rule is this last one, which is at least once a year, do a strategic career assessment. Take an afternoon, and let's move to the next page here. Take an afternoon, sit yourself down in a quiet room by yourself, and have an out-of-body experience. Pretend that you are sitting across the room from your normal, regular self, and that you are doing a very objective assessment of where you are in your career. The question, or the things that I mentioned earlier, are you happy? Do you like the subject matter? Do you like the environment? All of those things. And then figure out, generally where you want to go. If you want to be a subject matter expert or a senior manager or an SES, generally what that goal is. And so you need to look at what you've done in the last year, and you can do this more frequently if there's a lot of stuff going on, like maybe every 6 months. And you have to ask yourself all those questions, and then say, okay, what is happening right now in my career that moves me towards where I want to go? That's one question. The other one is, what do I need to do to move myself forward to get to where I want to go? And then you need to make course corrections, particularly if you want to get out of a bad situation or keep yourself from getting stuck. It is possible to, get comfortable somewhere, but then not progress from there. Now, one thing I will tell you, in the federal government, GS-13, the GS-13 level is the hardest level to get out of. There's a boatload of GS-13s in the federal government. They are, they're the people who do a lot of the work, and they are in positions where they can do damage, but it's usually reparable. When you get to the next level up, the GS-14 level, that level usually, if it is properly graded, requires people who have not only good technical knowledge and skills, but also judgment abilities. And the ability to deal with more ambiguous situations. Not everything is going to be cut and dried. And quite frankly, the further up the career ladder you go in the federal government, the more time you're going to spend dealing with things that are not cut and dried or black and white. They are going to be murky, flaky, weird sometimes. And so those skill sets become really important the higher up the level in the GS scale you go. And so you have to make sure that you are increasing your experience level with different things. And one little hack here that I can't emphasize enough is the identifying what you don't want to do is sometimes way more important than knowing what you actually do want to do. And I say that based on my own personal experience. I really thought I wanted to be an auditor when I was in grad school. And I actually had the opportunity to be a co-op student at the General Accounting Office, which is like the be-all and end-all of auditors. And after a few months, I realized that my personality didn't really fit the very specific, very picky, very black and white approach that you really need to being an auditor. And I was talking about this with one of my colleagues who he'd been around a while and he'd moved up a few levels through the ranks. And I said, I just don't think I said, my personality, I mean, I can be picky and black and white and precise, but I have to work at it, and I find it kind of tiring after a while. I don't think this is, and his response to me was, oh, don't worry, the longer you have this job, the more you will become like that. Now, here is where I exercised judgment and didn't say, yes, all the more reason to get out now. I did not say that to him, even though that was, in fact, what was going through my mind. But it was a very useful lesson, and I'm really glad I had it when I did, because I was at a point where it was easy for me to change jobs. In fact, I got selected as a presidential management intern right after that, so I left that agency entirely and went to the Small Business Administration, where I was doing program things that were a lot more interesting. But it did use my finance background. I cannot emphasize enough that if you get into a bad situation, and by bad, I mean one where you really decide you're a bad fit or you don't like it and don't want to be there, that is a really valuable piece of information, because you will never wonder, well, gee, what would have happened if I had done this? Because you know what happened and you didn't want to be there. So that allows you the flexibility and the opportunity to find something else that you do want to do that's more interesting, more fun, more intellectually stimulating, whatever it is you're looking for in life. Don't fret if you end up in a situation where you end up doing something that you don't like. You don't have to stay there, and it's a really useful thing as you go through your career. You will find that some areas you really like and some you don't, and each time you find that out from the next job that you have, it helps you narrow down or hone in on what you should be doing with your career. So let us move to the next slide, and let's talk about the specifics now of each of those categories. If you want to be an SME, and I know we have a lot of people here who do, you need to focus on your subject matter training, both hands-on and academic. You need to become a subject matter expert, so you need to become an expert. And the other thing you need to think about is focus on network building, because nobody's going to, if you don't know a bunch of people who know you, they're not going to know you're an expert. So you need to do networking. And I know if you're kind of introverted, that is hard. It is difficult to do networking if you are kind of shy and introverted. You have to make a real effort at it. But even if you're going to be, it isn't just if you're a subject matter expert. Those skills that you need to have to be a senior manager, you need to be able to fake not being an introvert. Because I actually am an introvert. People are oftentimes surprised to know that when I tell them that, because I know how to work a room at a reception. I know how to give speeches in my sleep practically, but I had to learn all of those things. So I will tell you, if you are an introvert and you have a job that requires you to do those things, you will be tired at the end of the day, because if it's not something that is innate in you, and it isn't in most people, to be perfectly honest, it can be a little draining, but you learn how to do it, and it serves you well to learn that skill set, even if you don't feel it. I don't think there's anything else about, the SME and the path you're going to take, depending on what area you're working in, is going to be very different. I mean, if you are working, say, in the agricultural, in USDA, for example, there's a whole bunch of parts of that. So the subject matter experts that know about aphids and what they have to do is very different than the subject matter experts that know about generation of electricity by rural co-ops. There are, food stamps is one of the biggest actual parts of USDA that most people don't realize. And so if you're a food stamp expert, you're not going to have much in common with the people in the Forest Service who are experts in whatever the bad bug is out there destroying forests that year. So you need to take into account, as you're doing your assessment of yourself, you need to take into account the subject matter that you are talking about and focusing on, and figure out what it is that you need to do. I mean, maybe there is a conference that is the be all and end all conference where everybody dealing with that particular bug goes. So you want to make sure you try to go to that conference every year. Maybe, for evolving areas, for example, like where I work here at the Department of Energy, there's a lot of new technologies that are emerging related to a lot of renewable energy and energy efficiency things. So there's not much going on. There's not a conference for the people that build the little widgets that make windmills work. So what you would be looking for would be to look at wind technology in general and whatever the specific thing that you're working on, and figure out, be creative about it. Write papers. In some jobs, writing a paper is going to get you on the map. It may require that you go back to school and get an advanced degree. Once again, it depends on what it is that, what that subject matter area involves. So you're going to have to, as part of your stepping back and having your out-of-body experience, you need to look closely at what a person going into the study of aphids needs to know and needs to do, and then figure out how to get those experiences and that education. All right, let's move on to the next slide. And this is high-level management. This is like a GS-14, GS-15 level in the federal government. There are GS-13 supervisors as well. And what I said about GS-13s a minute ago is very true. I don't know if the numbers are still exactly like this, but It used to be that there were 7 GS-13s for every GS-14 position in the federal government. If you think about that, when there's an open GS-13 position or an open GS-14 position, there are a lot of people GS-14 position. Interestingly, and it is the hard, except for SES, GS-14 is the hardest grade, the hardest GS grade to get in the federal government because there's so much competition for it. Going from a GS-14 to a GS-15 is not nearly as difficult because for every GS-15 position, there are only 3 GS-14s. So your odds are much, just your statistical odds are much better. Now, going into the SES, I mean, there's over 1 million civil servants, and there are, I think, there are now 8,000 SESs. So, that's pretty competitive. But what you need, once you move into senior level of, even just a 14 or a 15, you're going to spend less of your time doing anything cut and dried and technical than you are going to be spending your time dealing with personalities who may not always agree, who may hate one another, who may be very unruly and difficult to manage. I have a friend who says that, being a manager would be great if she didn't have to supervise people. And so, that is a factor. And I do know people who intentionally get out of that situation because they just really don't like dealing with managing people. Now, there are some positions in the federal government that are non-supervisory. Once you get into the 14, 15 and SES level, they're rare. But if you can snag one of those, it's a great deal because you're very senior, you're very, and you don't have to supervise people. I don't want to make this sound terrible because it really isn't, but supervising people does have its downside, and you need to be prepared. And that is why it is important to hone emotional intelligence skills. If you are unfamiliar with that term, I would look it up. You can find it you definitely find it on the internet. This is a set of skills that make you successful in terms of dealing with people. And the higher your emotional intelligence level is, the better deal you're probably going to have in life, because those are skill sets that you really need if you are going to function at very high levels in the government. There's a lot of, there's a lot of opportunity to use those skills, and they're called soft skills, and which I think in some ways is kind of an interesting way to call them or way to term them, because sometimes you have to use those skills to do very hard things. You have to make hard decisions that you're going to have people not like. And you have to be able to say, okay, I am forced because of the job that I'm in to do X. And X is going to have a very negative effect on this bunch of people over here, or this situation, or whatever it is. And so you're going to get blowback, and you have to be able to say to yourself, this was the right decision, even though I know these people aren't happy about it and I may have made an enemy here. That happens. And so you have to recognize that that's going to happen. This is another one of those hacks that I like to talk about, because if you can, I would warn someone if you can, and you won't always be able to, because it may be something that is, you can't really spill the beans early or anything like that. But if you can, let the other person know that it's not personal, that, you're making this decision and it's going to be bad for them, and they might be mad at you, but that is, some people will never forgive you, and you just have to know that you made an enemy and then watch your back whenever you're around them. Sometimes, though, they understand, and if they're kind of at your level, a lot of times they will understand why you had to do something that had a negative effect on them. Well, the way, karma is out there in the world, and sometime you may find yourself on the other end of something from them, and, hopefully they'll repay the favor. They won't do something that, or they, you just have to hope. And I would say, in my experience, most of the time, there are a few people who don't have a lot of emotional intelligence who just get really mad, and you've made an enemy for life, and you just have to recognize that and make sure you don't expose yourself to them. But most people will get why you did something. I mean, assuming that what you did made sense from a bigger picture perspective. And, hopefully time will mellow people out. Another thing that you have to do in a senior management and more senior management position is develop the ability to see over the horizon while simultaneously looking at the ground around your feet. Think of yourself in your career journey as being out on the prairie. The grass is tall, there's a gentle, wave to the land. And most of the time as a senior person, you are going to be looking at the bigger picture. You're going to be looking to see what's over that horizon. You're going to be looking to see, what's off to the side that might cause a problem. And every once in a while, you need to look around at your feet, because a lot of times there are garter snakes down there that are kind of icky and, but not particularly fatal. But what you want to look for is the occasional cobra that shows up at your feet, because you need to get rid of them fast. So you have to keep an eye on both. You can't spend a huge amount of time, and hopefully you will have trained subordinate folks who will be spending their time looking in the grass around your feet. But you need to do it every once in a while yourself and be aware of things. So when people tell you things, you need to make a mental note of it and make sure that it doesn't develop badly, because having something in your own office is not a good thing. So you need to develop the ability to see both perspectives and both angles and horizons. Let's move on. So now let's say that you decide you've been a GS-15, you've been an SME, you decided you wanted to get into management, so you got a GS-14, you ended up supervising, say, a unit of people who were doing the same thing that you were. One of the things that you're going to need to do there, and this is hard to do because you were really good at your job, otherwise you wouldn't have been promoted. But once you get into that management job, the things that you need to spend your time doing, you will get papers prepared by your staff you will look at them and you will go, well, I could have done a better job of this paper myself. And that's probably true. And you're going to want to go back and edit it. And that's not the right thing to do. Now that you're managing this unit, you're going to need to look at that paper and go, okay, are there quick suggestions that I can make and have the person fix the paper? Or is this paper sufficient to get what I need out of it? It is a very different perspective than I need to produce a really top A1 paper that is perfect. Not everything in government is perfect. It needs to be perfect enough to meet your need. And so I ended up managing an office that I had been the deputy in when the when the manager had a medical emergency that incapacitated him, and it had been going on for a while, and he had broken a lot of trust with a lot of the organizations outside of the government that office worked with. I had been off on another assignment and did not, and wasn't really aware of what was going on. And I got called in by the boss's boss, who said, I'm going to have to bring you back and put you in here because we can't, this is a $5 billion program and we can't have it fail. And there've been a lot of issues. So I came back, and every day for probably about 4 or 5 months, at the end of the day, I would stop and say to myself, what should I have been doing? What did I do today? And what should I have been doing today? Because having worked in that office for a lot of my career, I knew what all of the specific jobs in that office were, and I could have done them. But that wasn't my job anymore. My job was to repair the damage that had been done with the relationships that had been frayed and in some cases almost destroyed by this person's mental illness. I tell that story because you really do, once you make that leap from being a subject matter expert type of person to being a manager, you really need to make sure that you're doing the right thing. Now, most agencies have new supervisor training that's a couple of weeks long that everybody who gets promoted into a supervisory role has to take. Make sure you take it. And if your agency doesn't have that, try to get some, because it is a different perspective during your day. It's not the same thing that you did for the last 10 years or however long you worked as a subject matter expert. And it's just part of the natural progression, but it is different, and you have to do different things. So now you've been a 14 and a 15, you ended up, you ended up getting a 14, and you supervised your former colleagues, maybe, or maybe not. But so then you put in for a GS-15, which is your old unit plus 2 or 3 other units that you don't know anything about, or maybe don't know much about, and you certainly don't know as much about them as your own, if you came up through one of those units. So now you're going to have to spend your time asking really trenchant, pointed questions about this other subject matter that you're not nearly as familiar with. Or if you just come into if you get a job in another agency, you're going to spend a lot of time asking questions, and it's really important to ask the right questions. Once again, strategically. The who, why, what, where, but also the how, and also the where, you're going to have to form a vision of where this should go, of where this office should go. Sometimes you'll have more constraints than others, but, once again, think strategically. You cannot have a successful career in the federal government if you aren't strategic. If you are strategic and exercise that strategy thought process, you will be successful, because a lot of people aren't as strategic as they should be, and you just need to be more strategic than they are and figure out, I hate to use cliches, but that whole, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade is really true. And you can do that if you are very strategic. I had a boss who had a string of really terrible things happen in his work life. And it was amazing because he turned every single one of those things into a strategic advantage. The first couple of times I watched it, I thought, this is an accident, but it was thoughtful. And I learned a lot from watching him. And that is, that is a good way to be successful and surf the wave. And that is exactly what he did. He ended up in a couple of different offices as a result of that, and that's fine. I mean, it is. It can be a pretty wild ride sometimes, and sometimes looking back than while it's when it's happening, you have to be philosophical about it and say, okay, yeah, this sucks, but I've learned this from this, and the outcome of this is going to be something that's going to be good. So you just have to have that mindset, because it is true. I mean, those bad experiences, you do learn from them, even though they might be lessons you didn't really want to learn. If that's what happened, that's what happened, and you take the lesson and you move on. So when you get, and you want to go from your GS-15 job to your SES job, this is where having broad experiences previously in your career really pays off, because every new SES has to be approved by the Office of Personnel Management. And the way they do that is there is a panel. It's called a professional, I think it's a PRB, a Professional Review Board. And it's made up of I think it's now three existing SESs, people who've been SESs for a couple of years at least. And they review your application packet for whatever job you got selected for as an SES. And what they look for, what that PRB looks for when it reviews your information, is, do you have a breadth of experience in a variety of areas that would make us think that you are going to be able to handle the stuff that comes up if you are in an SES position. Now, there are two kinds. Among career SESs, there are SESs who interact directly with Schedule C political appointees. And then there are SESs that are kind of at a lower level that don't generally have aren't direct reports to SES, to Schedule C political appointees. The people who are, say running operations, like the job I have right now, I don't really interact with the Schedule Cs that much. I'm running an operation, but in previous jobs, I have had that. I have done that. And those are where your skill sets in terms of emotional intelligence and strategy are really essential, because you get people coming in who have a very limited life, a very limited, like 2-year term or 4-year term. And so they come in with an idea of what they want to do, and you have to help them do it. But you need to also make sure that it doesn't, that it's consistent with what, with sort of you need to make sure that the operations that you run are not harmed, or not, that are not negatively affected. So the skill sets that you need for those, jobs where you are reporting directly to a Schedule C are heightened job skills that you need to make sure you have, because it can be very, some of the best bosses that I have had were Schedule Cs, and I've also had some bosses that were really horrible. I've also had some non-Schedule C bosses who were horrible too. So you have to figure out how to weave your way through those situations. But generally speaking, the stuff that you are going to have to deal with, CS, you have to understand your budget, because you're probably going to have budget. You're going to have budget responsibility almost certainly in an SES position. You will in a GS-15, but you'll have, the SES that you report to will be able to help you work through that. So you'll have some backup there. But once you get to be an SES, you've probably got your own budget, and you need to know how to manage it. You need to know, and when I say that, you need to know how to spend it, but you also need to know how to ask for it. And that is actually the harder part. You need to once again, think strategically about what you need to do, and then figure out how to make the case for you to get the money that you need to do that. So you got to understand budgeting. You've got to understand financial management. You have to make sure that once you get the money, the budgeting is getting the money, the understanding financial management is spending the money, and you need to be careful as you do that. Because there are a lot of ways that you can run afoul of a lot of spending rules in the government. So you need to understand how personnel works, because you don't really want to have personnel issues. They are incredibly time consuming. They're not very positive, and they distract you from doing whatever your office is supposed to be doing. And some offices have horrible reputations and others are very good. You need to make sure that the way you manage your staff does not encourage bad personnel behavior. You need to, and you would think that everyone would know this, but I have seen environments where people just didn't get that sexist and racist jokes were not okay. And those things get you in trouble. And even if you aren't the one doing it, and you definitely should not be doing it, you need to make sure that nobody on your staff does it. And if you come into a situation where that's an issue, you really need to address that quickly and ruthlessly, because it will come back to haunt you. You don't have time. You need to focus on getting whatever it is your office does and get that done. And you don't want to be distracted by personnel issues, because those are very distracting. You also need to know something about depending on what you're doing, legislative process, because you may need to justify to the Hill why you need an increase in your budget. You may also be in a situation where you are given money that you may not have asked for, but then you have to spend it, and you have to figure out what the Hill meant when they worded the legislation, so that the way you spend it is kosher and legitimate for what they, for what they had in mind. And so if they're not clear, then you've got to figure out what. Here's a good example of this. When I was at Ag, I ran a grant program that had a provision in these. The Department of Agriculture gets reauthorized every 5 years in the Farm Bill, which is they're doing the Farm Bill right now. So you may have seen newscasts about the Farm Bill. Well, we get this legislation for a grant program that we already had, and it said that a certain amount of the appropriated dollars needed to go to a mid-tier value chain. And we looked at each other and said, okay, what's a mid-tier value chain? Because the statute did not define it. A lot of times it doesn't. Sometimes there's text that comes over from the Hill that addresses it, but there was nothing in the text that came over. So I called up the Hill committee and the committee staffer, and I said, we're happy to do this, but we don't know what this is. Can you shed some light? And she said, I don't know. Let me call you back. A couple days later, I get a call back from her, and she says, the staffer that put that in is no longer here, and nobody here knows really what that is. So just do your best. So I went to my staff and I said, okay, we get to do what, we've been basically given, we have been given a little free hand here to do this. So I said, let's see if we can find where this came from. So he went, my deputy went out and he looked around. He finally found a professor in either Minnesota or Michigan who had gotten his name associated with mid-tier value chain. So he calls the guy up and starts just firing questions with him. Well, what did you mean by this? How, you know, and the guy apparently stopped him after a while and said, "Stop." Said, I don't know. This was a concept. And that was it. I mean, it was a concept that he had, but he had never really thought through the practical implementation of it. So that was what we had to figure out, because it was in the statute and we had to implement it. So we came up with something that worked, and nobody, you know, I mean, we were fine because we met the letter of the law. But that's the kind of thing that you end up doing sometimes. Another situation, I ran some grant programs at the Small Business Administration, and I went out of town for work, and I was talking to the woman who ran one of these programs, and she said, you know, I'm hearing this rumor that you know, there's this new program that they want Treasury to implement, but you know, I've heard that we're going to get it. And I was like, yeah, right, because it was, you know, being proposed by a senator who didn't really like our agency, and I'm thinking, yeah, he'll never give it to us. So I didn't really too much worry about it. I come back a few days later, and she goes, guess what followed us home? This was a grant program that was supported by Senator Ted Kennedy, and Senator Phil Gramm of Texas did not like this at all, but he realized he was not going to be able to kill it. And they wanted to give it to the Treasury Department, but he hated the Treasury Department too. So he gave it to SBA. It ended up in our legislation. So, you know, not what we were expecting, not what we were prepared to do, but we had to do it. So those are the kinds of things that you deal with when you're an SES. And you have to, you know, it requires creativity, strategic thought, making sure you don't, you know, I hate to say where the bodies are buried, but when you're dealing with a long-term program that has a lot of people that have been doing whatever it is for a long time, knowing where, you know, knowing who doesn't get along with who is really important, because sometimes you can propose something and it'll never go anywhere, not because it's a bad idea, but because it is, you know, just it's something that's not going to happen. And I'm looking at the time here, so we can have. Do we have questions?
Yeah, we do. We have a bunch of questions, but I'm just going to pull one or two out because we unfortunately don't have all that much time left. How do you, I'm sorry, I'm scrolling down. How do you gain budget management skills when you don't have any opportunity to do so in your current role?
Well, it may be a skill set that you acquire in your next job. It may be, or, you know, like right now I have somebody who is an IT person, but our budget person is on maternity leave. And this IT person wanted that kind of experience. So she volunteered to fill in while the budget person was on maternity leave. So you can look for opportunities like that. Or it may be that's, you know, you can acquire that in numerous ways, but that's the kind of way you do it. And then maybe your next job, you'll have an opportunity where you can take responsibility for that because you want that experience.
Yeah, that's a good point. Another question, any suggestions for plotting a career trajectory when you, quote unquote, still don't know what you want to do when you grow up, or how to broadly... I think a lot of people never figure that out until the moment they die.
Well, I mean, I was just going to say, growing up is, you know, it's
overrated, right?
It's overrated. That's exactly right. There is no reason, if you're comfortable flitting from one place to another, that's fine. I mean, if you have a short attention span and you know, I mean, I would recommend that you master some skills along the way, because that'll make you get other jobs or help you get other jobs. But if you look around, look at where you are right now. And if there is some part of that job, even if it's a minor one, but it's something that interests you, pursue that, because you really don't know. I mean, as you progress through your career, you're going to have some jobs that you really don't like. And sometimes it's going to be because you don't like the people, but other times it's going to be because you don't like the work, and you need to, assess yourself, assess your situation, and go, okay, I don't want to do this ever again. Or I would really like to do this. And then maybe you do it and you don't like it, but that's okay. But you at least learned that you don't like it, so you can move on. Right. I mean, growing up is overrated. So
there's a related question. I think this is going to have to be it because we're over. But how do you broadly experience possible career options like departments, agencies, roles without actually changing jobs every year or so? That's a good question, because you want to expand, but who wants to change a job all the time? And
that is an interesting question. A year is probably not. I mean, depending on what the job is and what you're getting out of it, a year, it may not need to be every year, but you can stay in the same agency. I mean, I spent a big chunk of my career in one agent I've worked in 3 federal agencies as a senior executive, but I came up in one and worked several different jobs there, doing different things, working for different people. So you can do it that way. And so if you get into an agency, and one other thing I would say is, when you are picking an agency, pick an agency that is well regarded by the Hill, because the agency will have more money, and you will have more opportunity to travel and to be trained, and more things that will be going on that you will do. And if there's a new area that's growing, get into that, because you will have opportunities to grow. If it's a new program that just got funded, that's a great opportunity. That was really helpful in my career, because I ended up getting a lot of experience dealing with a whole bunch of things, because it was a new loan program and I was the key person that worked on it. So look for those opportunities. You want new stuff and money.
That's awesome. This has been, I wish we could get to more of the questions, but it's, and we could be talking for a lot longer. This has been super helpful. And I know me personally, as you were talking, I was cycling back through things in my head and jobs that I decided I definitely don't want to do this anymore. And when I actually, several years ago, I decided I needed to change direction after having changed direction. And my husband said to me, "What was your favorite job?" And it was what I did right after I got out of grad school. And he's like, "So then apply for those jobs." And it was a career pivot, but it was the best thing I did. So not government, it wasn't in government, but it's still, it made a difference. But anyway, that's all the time we have, which I really, really regret. I wish we had more. But I want to thank our NextGen sponsor, our NextGen Partner Alliance for helping put on this year's NextGen Summit. And just a few reminders: go and fill out the CPE evaluation form to get your credit. Check out the really amazing booths in the exhibit hall, because they're filled with great information. And we have our closing keynote, keynote at 3 p.m. Eastern, so in 12 minutes. And you can access that session by going back to the main environment through the conference hall. So thank you so much for attending, everyone. Thank you so much, LeAnn. This has been a really great conversation. I appreciate your insights and everything.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.